So now we have the big rocks out of the way. That's the code and standards and all the minutiae that goes with that, and certainly you should feel good about having that behind you if you've been watching this straight through. But now it's time to dig into what I refer to as the stub material. So we'll see here objectivity standards for a research platform at, let's say, a equity research shop. Okay? And then we have some case studies and such that we can do as well. So here we're going to talk about CFA Institute Research Objectivity Standards, and these are fairly straightforward, and what you're going to see is that if you learn the code and standards, in particular the standards of professional conduct well, you're going to see them applied here, and there's lots of redundancy. That's a good thing. It helps you prepare for the exam, but this is just a way of re-emphasizing and expanding your intuition about what it means to be objective in the research function. So when describing a firm's policies, procedures, and such, you have to strive to maintain several different objectives with respect to research objectivity. So first of all, we want to prepare research and recommendations, investment actions, again, that's all of our professional activity, that always puts the client first. So the client is the entity that we are going to primarily serve, and we want to make sure that their interest comes first. Remember, that's before employer and certainly before you as an analyst or a lowly member that's trying to adhere to these to the standards. We want full, fair, and meaningful disclosure of all conflicts. And again, this term meaningful is going to be important, so we have to do this in a way that it is going to be an effective disclosure of any conflicts that exist. And then we want to promote effective policies and procedures that minimize potential conflicts that would impact our independence or objectivity. Disclosure is a remedy, at least partially, for the existence of conflicts of interest, but a much preferable solution to disclosure of a conflict would be to have no conflict at all. So we want to establish an environment in which the research is occurring where we have minimized or, to the extent possible, eliminated these conflicts. So disclosures are good, but not having something that needs to be disclosed is even better. So when designing the firm's policies, we have several objectives we need to achieve. Okay? We're going to support this idea of self-regulation. So we want to, again, it's better that we do it to ourselves than have somebody do it to us. So if we can provide an environment that supports the investing public, that provides them with unbiased information where they can make good decisions, then we are much less likely to need government oversight. So we want to adhere to specific measurable standards that promote independence and objectivity. And like I say, if we do that, then well, we'll be monitoring ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I much prefer to monitor myself than to have someone monitor me. And I'm hoping to get this ankle bracelet off soon. So we want to provide an ethical work environment so that the people that work in our particular research shop feel like they are free to maintain their independence and objectivity, and that they can pursue an ethical career where they're going to be able to do good research and have that accepted as being an independent, objective statement of the investment value of a particular security. So what we have now are 11 different points that are going to be in CFAI's research objectivity standards. I don't think that the goal here is to be able to write a paper on each of these standards, but rather to know something about what is contained within the standards. And I think you'll see, again, that there's lots of redundancy from the code and standards as we previously discussed. So the research objectivity policies here, parts 1 through 11, this is something that I think, again, you'll find intuitive, but gives us a little more broad-based understanding of how to actually structure a research environment that would promote this goal of objectivity. So part 1 here, research objectivity policy. So we have to have a formal, written independence and objectivity of research policy to distribute. So we ought to have something saying that In this shop, research is going to be done in an environment where independence and objectivity is the order of the day, and it ought to be written down and something we can distribute to our analysts as well as external constituents that might request it. Supervisory procedures are going to be in place, so we're going to have supervisors who understand what it means and why it's important and be able to create an environment that will, again, foster this notion of objectivity, and then have a senior officer to attest annually to the fact that we are in compliance with our own policy. So this first part, we need to have a policy. It needs to be written. It needs to be something that we can distribute, that it's got procedures in place, and, of course, an annual attestation by a senior officer that we are in compliance. Part 2, public appearances. So if you're making public appearances to discuss research or investment recommendations, covered employees, those that are covered by this policy, must first disclose any personal and firm conflicts of interest. Now, that is the basic rule or guideline. If you have conflicts, you disclose those. Remember, when we think back to the code and standards, there are considerations for abbreviated discussion as well. So if you're making a very short presentation, you only have 7 minutes, then you can have limited disclosure, and you can follow that up with access to a more complete presentation and a more complete disclosure environment. Part 3, reasonable and adequate basis. So we've talked about this in the standards of professional conduct as being one of the really important things that we do. So the firm has to require that research reports and recommendations have a reasonable and adequate basis. So and I didn't mean to actually scratch that out, but nonetheless, reasonable and adequate basis, view that as an underline, because that is going to be what determines the viability of the report. Right? So we want to be able to say that we have concluded this about the firm, and we have the data and the models and all the other stuff that will go along with it to back up our recommendation. So we're going to have a designated individual or group to review and approve all research reports and recommendations. And again, we're hoping this is going to occur before it's distributed beyond our little domain. So once it goes external, we want to have it reviewed by either a supervisor or a group that approves those research recommendations. Part 4, investment banking. So again, we see a little bit of paranoia here, at least in my mind, about the interaction between investment banking and research, or investment banking and buy-side analysts. So the firm with investment banking operations has to have policies and procedures that first are going to separate research from investment banking. So you've got research, they're going to do their thing, they're going to produce recommendations. Investment banking, they're going to do their thing. What we don't want, okay, is this last bullet point down here, where we're saying we don't want investment banking to be involved with research or to be influencing the recommendation. So we need to ensure that the analysts, okay, those that are producing the recommendations, don't report directly to the investment banking folks, because investment banking folks have a different set of incentives, right? They're trying to win business. It's hard to win business from a company if your shop is saying their stock is a sell, for instance, right? So investment banking stuff, again, we're going to have this separation so that communication is monitored between these two groups. 5, analyst compensation. So we want to make sure that we link research analyst compensation to the quality of research and recommendations. So they're going to produce recommendations, they're going to produce research. Okay, we're going to have some mechanism in place to determine the quality of that research, and we want to see a link between compensation and quality research. We don't want to see a link between an analyst compensation and investment banking revenues or profits or corporate finance activities. So we want the research department to be rewarded based on quality research. Let the investment bankers do whatever they're going to do, but we don't want the crossover. Just like we don't want an analyst reporting to an investment banker, we don't want an analyst's income, personal income, dependent on what investment bankers say or investment banking operations, because that will, of course, create a conflict. 6, relationships with subject companies. So analysts can't allow subject companies prior to the publication of a report to see any portion of the report that's going to signal the rating or recommendation. And they also, of course, can't promise that, I'm going to give you a buy recommendation, those types of things. Now, there's a subtlety to be careful of here, and that is an analyst can take a research report and preparing it for distribution to the public and can show some portion of that to the company in order to verify factual data. So we have a report on, what's happened with growth internationally, and the analyst could take that to the company and say, is this factual? But whatever the company sees prior to distribution to the public can't signal, oh, this is going to be a buy, a hold, or sell. It's just to verify factual information. So the company can see portions of the report, but can't see any portion that is going to signal to them what the rating is going to be or what the analyst is going to end up recommending. Part 7, personal investment and trading. So again, this is an opportunity for there to be big issues with independence objectivity. So the firm has to have policies in place that address employee personal trading. So what is it that the employee is putting into their portfolio or taking out? Well, of course, we went into this business because we like finance, we like economics, we like the evaluation or valuation of firms. So it's natural to think that analysts are going to be fairly active in the formation of their personal portfolio. But we have to make sure that we have a policy to address how that occurs. In particular, we have to make sure that there is no front running. So we know of trades that are going through. Well, we can't jump in front of those if we think it's going to drive the price up or drive the price of a security down in order to be able to profit from that as individuals. So we want to ensure that employees and their immediate family members don't trade contrary to the firm's recommendation. So you have an employee, we've got a buy recommendation on Apple stock, let's say. Well, the employee and the employee's immediate family should not be selling Apple stock, right? Now, there is an exception, and that exception is severe financial hardship. And you have to be careful in the interpretation here, because it's not the notion that, well, you can trade contrary to the firm's recommendations if you're having financial trouble, even though it's bad for clients or bad for the investing public. That's not the point. The point is that if you think of having Apple stock in your portfolio, there could have been problems outside of the professional scope for this particular employee, meaning that could have been an accident or have illness somewhere in his family or her family and need the cash associated with the securities. Well, under those circumstances, there's going to be a financial hardship if they don't sell. Then they can trade trade contrary to the firm's recommendations. But it's not that if you're really hard up, you can none of the ethics stuff matters anymore. It's just a matter of liquidity need is trumping the need to align the trades and the firm's recommendations. So severe financial hardship would be an exception to trading in congruence with the firm's recommendations. Also, in terms of personal investment and trading, we need to ensure that employees and immediate family members do not purchase or receive in some manner shares prior to the IPO of a subject company or companies in the industry the employee covers. So if I'm covering some companies and covering them in particular industry, well, I'm not going to have any shares of that, any shares from the companies that I cover or from companies that operate in that industry prior to those firms going public. So we all talked several times about hot IPOs and allocation procedures and all that sort of stuff. That would also pertain to pre-IPO type stuff. So the employee and the employee's immediate family should not have shares prior to an IPO of covered companies or companies in the industry that the employee is covering. Part 8, timeliness of research reports and recommendations. And this one is fairly simple, but we need to regularly issue reports on subject companies, and we need to do it on a timely basis. So we don't want to come out with a report every third year. Okay? So with some regularity, you'll see reports come out on a quarterly basis when the firm is reporting quarterly reports, those types of things. If you've ever been an analyst, you're certainly familiar with the harrowing experience that is earnings season. So when you've got that going on, you've got to update lots of reports. So you have to produce these reports in a timely manner, and if you're not going to do it, then you need to cease coverage, which just means you would do a final report, say we don't plan to cover this firm in the future. But you either produce them timely or you don't produce them at all is the point here. 9, compliance and enforcement. Again, we need to have policies and procedures in place, and we need to be able to enforce those policies and procedures. That is, we have some disciplinary sanctions, we monitor the effectiveness of our procedures, and we maintain records to show that we have policies, okay, we are monitoring their effectiveness, and that we have concluded that they're either adequate or we are developing extensions or enhancements to make them effective going forward. 10, disclosure. Disclose conflicts of interest related to covered employees or the firm as a whole. Absolutely nothing new here relative to Part 6 of the Standards of Professional Conduct. So if there are conflicts of interest that exist, then they have to be disclosed. Again, we want to promote an environment that minimizes conflicts. But in a world as nested as finance is, we're never going to completely get rid of conflicts of interest. So the only option left to us is to make sure that we have effective and clear disclosures when there is a conflict that exists. And finally, we have a rating system here. So again, this is we've seen similar stuff to this in the Standards of Professional Conduct. Okay, but and wisely, CFAI, or as we promulgate the ethics material, says to have a system and doesn't specify what the system is. But we need to have a rating system. Okay, so we have a rating system that is intended to be an evaluator of the quality of research produced by an analyst, but it doesn't have to just be a rating system. It has to be a rating system that investors find useful, right, for investment decisions, and one that provides investors with information they can use in order to determine suitability of specific investments for their own portfolio. So again, they don't tell us what this rating system is, but certainly we need to have one, and there are a number of standards that you can rally around in the industry, but we have to have something in place so that we can evaluate the quality of research, and something that investors will find useful in the investing process.